Right. Well, good evening and welcome to our third Fall into OBOB event. I'm Julie, the events manager at Roundabout Books. There's just a few housekeeping items we need to cover before we get started. So this event is being recorded. If you don't want to be on video, and we know that can be an issue with people younger, you can turn off your video function. You will still see and hear us. And then please remain muted until you are asked to speak, and then I will unmute you because we will have a Q&A section. Comments and questions are welcome in the chat screen throughout the event. We always want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that our bookstore in Bend, Oregon resides on the ancestral unceded land of the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. In our immediate area are also the unceded lands of the Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians and the Tribes of Grand Ronde. We encourage everyone to learn more about the land you occupy and the story of its peoples. If you need help finding those kind of books, your local independent bookstore is one of your best resources, as is your local library, since we have a librarian with us tonight. And then a quick reminder, next Thursday is our OBOB event with Rob Harrell for The Life of Zarf, The Trouble with Weasels. And then the following Thursday, October 27th, Ruth Behar will talk about letters from Cuba. So if you're not already registered for those two events, please check out our website or Eventbrite. And if you want more information about our other events and book clubs, please visit roundaboutbookshop.com. So let's talk about the reason why we are all here, which is While I Was Away. So Blackbird Fly meets the farewell in this empowering middle grade memoir from author Waka T. Brown, who takes readers on a journey to Japan, where she was sent as a child in the 1980s to reconnect to her family roots. So just a little bit about our author. Waka Brown was the first American born in her family. She is a Stanford graduate with a master's in secondary education. She's currently an instructor at the Stanford Program on International and Cross-Cultural Education, authoring curriculum on several international topics, and winning the Association for Asian Studies National Franklin Buchanan Prize. That was quite a mouthful. Let's see here. While I Was Away is her debut memoir for young readers and is followed by her first novel, Dream, Annie, Dream. She lives with her family in Portland, Oregon. Waka Brown, thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about this book that was selected for the Oregon Battle of the Books.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I have to ask you this, and I haven't asked anybody else this yet. Did you get notified that your book was chosen for OBOB?
You know, I don't know if I was notified, but I knew like some teachers had nominated it.
Okay.
So then I did check the site, I think, but no, come to think of it, I never got an official notification email saying your book is an OBOB selection. So I found out by looking on the website.
That's interesting. So then when we reached out to you and said, hey, we're doing these OBOB events, was that the first one where someone said, do an event with us?
I think so. I have a couple lined up. Like I have one later in November.
Okay.
And I might have done one more, but it's kind of, yeah.
I hope there are many more.
first.
I mean, I hope obviously that you have lots of book events, but I'm just really excited about these, highlighting Oregon Battle of Books. It's not something we did when I was a kid in the Oregon school system, so I really love it. So let's just talk about your book, first of all. So it is a memoir, it's about you. What made you want to go ahead and write your kind of, younger life story?
Well, it's definitely the time period in my life that was, I think, the most formative and the most, in some ways, like the most exciting 5 months that I've ever had, and it was scary. And I thought, well, it might make a good story. And I had thought, even when I had returned from Japan, oh, someday I might write about this. And then, decades later, I decided, yeah, maybe it's time because I'm starting to forget certain details. And so I was like, I better write this all down before I forget.
Yeah, that's a good thing to think about too. Were you someone who journaled as a child though, to kind of remember things like that? Do you kind of recommend journaling for people?
I recommend journaling if you want to be a writer. Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. Because, even though I wasn't very, I guess, regular with my journal keeping, um, I did go back and I read everything. And some of it, I don't even remember the events that I had written about, but clearly they happened because I recorded it. And some of them I had forgotten, but as soon as I read about it again, I was like, "Oh yeah," and all these memories would come back. And so for anyone who wants to be a writer, it's just good practice to journal. And you don't have to beat yourself up about like missing a day or a week or a month, but I think later on too, you look back and I think you're always glad that you wrote the stuff down, because no matter how much you think you'll remember, I think there are details. There's only so much the brain can hold.
right. That's true. Um, so I guess tell us a little bit about what it was like, when your family, I guess, said, "Hey, we're going to send you overseas." What did you feel like?
Well, at first I was like, I think they're joking, because I couldn't fathom like just being by myself because we had gone, you know, um, like as a partial family, as a full family, to Japan over the summers, but never like my older siblings weren't sent by themselves. So I was like, I think they're kidding. But then it became clear that they weren't. And yeah, I was not happy about that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And at that time in the 80s, there wasn't maybe the Japanese immersion schools that there are now, because
No.
it sounds like, one of the synopsis of the book is that you're starting to lose your Japanese language.
Hmm.
And so that's, one of the things. But I know that there are now, because friends of mine have sent their children to them in Portland, there are Japanese immersion schools.
Yeah.
Do you think
And
if there had been that option, sorry, you don't need to get every single bone out of the bag. I told you, an 11-month-old puppy is not the best event person. Hi, stop. Do you think maybe your parents would have sent you to a school as opposed to sending you overseas, or was it a lot about family?
that's a good question. It's a lot of ifs because like in Topeka, um, I don't I don't think there would ever be a Japanese
Mm,
language immersion school. And, we were within 90 minutes of Kansas City. And Kansas City, I think, did have a sort of Japanese weekend school. But my parents didn't send me to that either because, I mean, I was the third of four kids and driving back and forth to Kansas City, which would have been 3 hours total driving every weekend. I don't think they would have done it. And so I think they thought the most effective and probably least expensive way, minus the plane ticket, would be to send me for five
yeah.
months. And so they were right. It was definitely effective. But
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the best immersion you can ask for, whether it's a language you already knew how to speak and then, brushing up on it. Or I had a friend move to Costa Rica in high school with her family, and she picked up on Spanish really quick
mhm.
because she had to. Yeah. So, what's one of the things that you maybe want readers to know when they're picking up this book and reading through it and finishing it?
Hmm. Well, I think since it is a memoir and real life doesn't fall into like tidy lessons and endings. Um, and it's okay, I guess, is what I think I'd like readers to come out with. It's like, even if you don't have like the fairy tale ending, um, still things work out in their own way. And
Yeah.
I guess there are different types of stories. Because I think this story is different from like a typical like beginning, middle, end, happy ending, everything's resolved type of story. And yeah, I want readers also to come away with the idea that, this is my story, it's true. But everybody, I think, has a story worth telling.
Right.
So when someone reads this story, I want them also to think about, oh, well, what could I write about? Because I'm not famous, I wasn't famous before the book came out, I'm not famous now, but it's still a story, and I feel like everybody has a story that they can tell that people will find interesting.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that, you did have journal entries to look back on, but what is it like though to still be writing from an adult perspective, but about things that happened to you as a kid? Because, maybe what you remember may have changed a little too
Mhm.
from what other people in your family remember happening during that time. What was that like?
I did consult with my parents too about some of there are some aspects. I'm trying to think of a specific example, but like when I was 12, I viewed it a certain way, you
Right.
know. But then after talking with my parents and thinking about it, I've come to realize, oh, well, maybe that's what was going on, like because there's a whole bunch of stuff that didn't make it into the book, so because it you don't want it to have it too long. But with my grandmother, when she got really mad, at the end, I was thinking about that, and I'm still kind of like, why'd she get so mad? And then while I was writing it, I was like, maybe she was mad I was spending so much time at my friend's house, maybe.
Yeah.
And then like maybe she had already made dinner, and then you kind of go like you think about it more from, well, I'm an adult now. My grandmother is an adult. What would an adult have been thinking, And
Yeah.
so um, that's been an interesting process.
Yeah. So something I kind of want to ask you about, and this is hard to both phrase and maybe to answer, but do you think that there is a difference, at least from your perspective, that your Japanese family wanted you to hold on to that heritage and keep your language, where sometimes we see immigrant families wanting their children to more assimilate to the US and maybe not speak their, native or mother tongue and speak English? Do you see that as a difference with certain immigrant experiences?
Yeah, definitely among some of my friends who, their parents also came over from Asia. Some of them, they don't speak any, they don't speak the language of their parents at all
Yeah.
because at that time there was also this idea that if you held on to your mother tongue, I guess, it would make English harder to learn. And
Mm,
it's not true, but it
right.
was kind of the mindset. And so I definitely have friends who were encouraged not to speak like a word of Chinese or any Japanese because um, by doing so, they would not become American, I think is what the idea was.
Yeah.
And almost all of them regret it. They regret not being able to speak another language.
Yeah, it feels like an interesting, maybe this is again too much of a generalization, but that the US culture asks more of that than maybe other cultures do. Like I can't really imagine hearing from someone that they moved to France and had kids and didn't, teach them both languages, kind of that, European countries maybe, and we are so very much speak English here, don't speak
Hmm.
something else, which is unfortunately come back around so much in the last couple of years. We've seen this all over social media, when someone, is speaking their mother tongue and someone in a store is like, you're in America, speak English.
Yeah, yeah.
How did, in the 80s, again, you're talking about that feeling. Were you ever worried, or now do you see it as, how am I trying to phrase this? Were you ever worried that keeping that Japanese culture was going to cause issues as you being an American?
Oh, as a kid,
Yeah.
I definitely was not interested in keeping up with my Japanese. I wanted to be like as, you know, as much as possible like my classmates.
Yeah.
Anything that made me different, I was not happy about. And so yeah, I wanted to do everything that my friends were doing. And so, like, maintaining culture, or, yeah, that really wasn't something that I was tremendously interested in as a kid.
Yeah. Would you say that one of the takeaways of this book, though, is that you should retain, you should find out about whatever culture you come from, and hold it because it's beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. And, afterwards, I was very happy that I have that. I now have like two homes.
Mm.
Whenever I go back to Japan, it feels like this is my second home. And so I think I think that's a very nice gift to have. And so yeah, I think kids should be proud of where they've come from,
Yeah.
and it's definitely one of the takeaways from that book, I think.
Excellent. Well, you said you had a reading for us.
Yeah, I
Yeah, let's
thought
do
that I
that.
would maybe read some of the excerpts of the letters.
Okay.
And this kind of, I like reading the letters because right now with texts and FaceTime, and like if you want to reach your friend, you don't have to wait 8 days to send a letter, wait for them to get it, write back, and send it back. So, like, the quickest I would get a response from my friend would be 8 days. So
Wow.
imagine if you were sending a text to your friend and they didn't answer for 8 days. I think it
Right.
would drive you crazy. But actually, 8 days was the quickest I would get a response. So this is a letter to my friend Chris, who I actually still keep in touch with. And I'll actually skip some parts of it, but I'll go ahead and read it to you. So, hey Chris, why haven't you written to me yet? Have you been kidnapped? Have you broken both arms? Have you forgotten who I am? I'm Waka, by the way, and if you've written and I'm about to receive your letter in a day or two, never mind what I just said, but if you haven't written to me yet, write to me, please. How is everything? How is Kansas? I hope your summer vacation is going better than my stupid summer non-vacation summer school in Japan. Okay, it's not all bad. I was really nervous about school here, but it hasn't been as awful as I thought it would be. Not yet, anyway. Ha ha. For one, we get a lot of recesses. They're not at set times during the day. Basically, it seems like whenever we're done with class stuff, the teacher says, go play, and we get to run outside for 15 to 20 minutes. So sometimes we get 3 recesses a day. Usually just 2, though. I like to swing upside down on the gymnastics bar and have someone spot me as I let go and try to land on my feet, just like we used to. Sometimes I play tag. Being the new kid isn't as awful as I thought it would be. Let's see. Oh, okay. Lunch is also really good here, but it's not in a cafeteria like our school. Before lunch, a group of students leave to grab the classroom's food from the school kitchen. Then, these students put on white smocks and caps like they're the lunch ladies, only there are boys in the mix too. They set up a food station in the back of the classroom while the rest of us wipe down our own desks and line up with our trays to get our lunch. Today it was breaded and fried pork cutlet over shredded green cabbage and steamed rice. Really yummy. I still miss chili on Thursdays with canned peaches and cinnamon rolls, but Japanese school lunches are actually pretty good. A few things are really different here. First, I'm tall here. That means you would be too. We'd be giants together. I mean, there are a few girls who are taller than me, but not many. I'm even taller than a lot of the boys. It's a weird feeling not to have to look up to people to talk. Second, we have to clean the schools, like the students have to, not the janitors. You know how Kevin B would always stick his gum under his desk? Well, if he were in Japan, he'd have to clean it. This past Tuesday, we didn't have any classes, and literally all the students cleaned everything. We were on our hands and knees scrubbing the floor. We didn't even get to use mops. I didn't mind so much though. If I had to choose between studying my Japanese or hard labor, I'd choose hard labor, hands down, 100%. Which leads me to, last but not least, I'm a total flunky here, like really not smart. You know how I liked social studies and English in Mrs. Davenport's class? Well, over here, I really don't like them at all. In social studies, we're studying Japanese history instead of US history, and it sounds pretty much like this to me. Hundreds of years ago, this person who you never heard of battled with another person who you never heard of. He was the head of a group of people you never heard of. The site of this battle was at a place you never heard of, and it resulted in a change in this law you didn't know was a law to this new law you don't understand the importance of. I'm never complaining about US history again. 200-ish years is nothing compared to the 1600 years of Japanese history I'm lost in now. Oh man, an English class. I guess it's Japanese class here. Don't even get me started. I can barely read anything. Not only am I going to school during the summers, this week my teacher started tutoring me during his smoking breaks. So remember what I said about lots of recesses? I think I'm going to have a few less starting from now on. I guess I should be thankful he's willing to spend extra time helping me. I wish he wouldn't smoke, though. Not only will it kill him eventually, but it makes my eyes water. At least he blows the smoke away from me. And so I will skip a little bit and I will end the letter. Sorry, as you can see, I'm going crazy here, so please write to me. Friends forever, write back soon. So that is my reading.
That was great. Thank you. I think that is something that even myself as a child of the 80s didn't remember that, I would send letters when I was at summer camp and then we would, write each other throughout the year. And then of course it would taper off and you'd pick it back up at summer camp. But now, yeah, it's so instantaneous, that communication, that feeling of, why isn't this person texting me back? And yet you had to wait, I'm sure it was closer to 2 weeks,
Yeah.
to get those letters, and over a 5-month time span that must have just felt like forever.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
did feel like forever. And so it was so exciting to go to the mailbox and see, an envelope there.
Yeah.
And it was always an issue of like, I guess people have emails that cross, but like it was always really hard when our letters would cross because
Yeah.
you'd think there'd be responses in there to the questions you asked in your last letter, but they wouldn't have gotten your letter yet. And so then you
Right.
had to wait like an extra, 10 days to 2 weeks. So,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's something I hadn't thought about for a long time. Well, let's go ahead and open it up to our audience for questions. So those of you who are with us, you guys know Zoom just as well as anybody else. So if you want to type it into the chat window, you can, and then we'll read it out loud. If you want to talk with our author, you can either use the raise hand function or just wave at me in your screen, and I'll unmute you and you can ask your questions. So if anybody has one, let's go ahead and do that. All right. I know this is like being in school. You don't want to be the first one. Are any of you reading this for the Oregon Battle of the Books? Is this the book you're going to present about? Yeah. So Atlas, do you have any specific questions for the author then?
Well, I was just gonna ask, so earlier you were saying that you had to go through journals.
mhm.
Were there any things that you were really like surprised about or you just didn't expect to find?
Hmm. Well, a year after I came back, I was really surprised to see like a diary entry that said, I think I'm going to write a book. And so I was like, whoa, like I didn't remember writing that. I remember thinking that. And so that was kind of special to me because I was like, I did. I ended up writing a book, um, yeah, decades later, but I did it. So that was kind of cool. Um, some journal entries too. I read them and I was really mad at my past self because I could tell that the journal entry was super short because I wanted to get out and play. And so there was no detail. And I remember looking at this one journal entry that said, like, it's July 25th, it's 40 degrees, so Celsius, it's 40 degrees and clear. And then it's like I studied, and that was it. That was it for the entry. And so I was like, oh man, I wish someone made me write more because like that's the most boring entry in the world. So, but yeah, there were some journal entries like that, and I could tell that I probably was told make sure to write in your journal and then you can play. And so I did. I wrote 2 lines in my journal, and that then I probably had a good time.
That's a great question. So with the journal entry that you found that said, I want to write a book someday, which I can look this up, but I want to, mention this for everybody. Did you write while I was away or Dream Annie Dream first?
I wrote while I was away first.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had them, I guess, maybe flipped in my timeline of publications
Oh,
because,
okay.
I was like, oh, well, if you'd already written your fiction book, like, isn't that even funnier? But did you, once you'd written while I was away, did that kind of like open you up to wanting to write more?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I have been writing for a really long time, and while I was away was the first thing that has been published.
Okay.
So I
Very cool.
actually started out, I would say my first love was movies. And so I started out writing screenplays. And so I've written over a dozen screenplays, but it's really, really, really hard to sell those, you know? And so I was like, well, I'm getting kind of tired of writing something that no one reads, that's not going to be made into anything that that anybody sees. So I'm going to try to write something that at least a few more people will read. So that's how While I Was Away came about.
Well, maybe it'll come back around and one of these will get optioned into
Maybe.
something
I
because
mean,
that could
that's
be
the
really
dream.
fun.
Yeah, it would be a very roundabout way to make a movie, but I think it's actually quicker than writing a screenplay.
Yes.
But yeah,
And
that's
especially if you have the interest and the, following of a book to turn it into a movie. I mean, I'm hearing from people that, first books that have only been out for a year are already being optioned because there's so many streaming services now.
right.
Um, so Chloe asked in the chat what inspired you to write this book. And we kind of talked about it before about, this was your own experience and wanting to remember it. But was there more, just real inspiration to tackle this before maybe a fiction?
Yeah, before you know that you're going to get published, um, you kind of have to write what you want to write. You can't
Mhm.
think that publication is your ultimate goal. I mean, it is, but you can't write for that. You can't be like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'm going to write this thriller that I'm not really interested in because I know that thrillers are selling well. That's not a pleasant experience. And so I remember wanting to write about this and then realizing that my memories were starting to fade. And so I was like, you know what? Whether or not this is ever published, I want to have this as kind of a record of this time
Yeah.
in my life for, maybe my kids to read, maybe my grandkids in the future would read it. But I feel like it's an important piece of like family history because, like, not only for my history, but my grandparents' history. And with my kids being born and raised here, I was like, I want them to know a little bit more about their Japanese side of their family. So that was ultimately like why I felt like I absolutely needed to write it, you know, regardless of publication, regardless of anyone else. I was like, at least there will be a record. And then maybe my kids would enjoy it later, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, I love that. I do hope more people do that just for their own families. I think about how many stories we lose from our grandparents
Right.
because that's just the way life works. So this is beautiful that you do have this, written and uh real, I mean, books are art. I will argue with anybody. So you have this wonderful piece of art that could live forever, that's about a fantastic time in your life. Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
beautiful. Do we have any more questions from our viewers? I'm sure I can think of a few more. I'm pretty good at talking about books. Um, have you read any of the other books that are on the OBOB list, or do you have books that are similar to yours that you would love to recommend to us?
I have read Taylor Before and After. So that is the Oregon Book Award winner for the
Yes.
children's book division. So I have read that.
We just talked
Um,
with Jenny last week.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
She's in
So if
Ashland.
anybody wasn't able to be at our Jenny England event last week, it's also up on our YouTube. And she stopped by the store and signed some copies.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a really good book.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that book. Let's see. I am currently reading this book called Hour of the Bees. I don't think I have it. Yeah, it's in the other room. But that's interesting because it mixes in like a grandfather's say kind of a fantastical tale um, with kind of real life happenings.
Mhm.
Um, so I've been reading that. I've also read let's see, Ty Keller's book, When You Trap a Tiger. That won the Newbery 2 years ago. And that's another story about a girl's kind of relationship with her Korean grandmother. And it mixes in like some Korean folk tales as well. Um,
Okay.
yeah, those are all good. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think middle grade. There is a YA that sometimes it's like, is YA appropriate for middle grade yet? Because like sometimes like the material gets um, don't want to say racy, but it's like whoa, there's a
Right.
big jump right from middle grade.
Yeah. We were talking about that with Jenny England with Taylor Before and After, because OBOB classified it with the 6th through 8th grade, which
Mm-hmm.
is pretty appropriate. Her publisher wrote like 8 to 12-year-olds on the back. And her thought, so if anybody, again, if you've read this or interested in, Taylor Before and After deals with a lot of mental health issues,
Mm-hmm.
depression, and some repercussions of a drunk driving accident. And it gets dark,
Mm-hmm.
and Jenny was really honest about that, and that, you need to be prepared for reading that. Um, but also it's talking about stuff that kids need to talk about. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
stuff that happens that yeah, you don't want to wait too long to talk about that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I know that there's a couple other books, because the OBOB does go up to 12th grade, and we're doing David Robertson's The Barren Grounds at the end, or at the beginning of November, and I think
Okay.
that one's on the high side of reading level. But yeah, I'm really excited for that one too. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I said, I kind of wish Oregon Battle of the Books had been around when I was in school, because not only was I like fanatical reader, but I could get a little competitive.
Yeah.
So it's just such a wonderful program. I'm really excited that they do these. And obviously if you make it down here to Bend soon, or anything like that, we'd love to have you in the store to sign books, and maybe have people stop by and say hello.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
let's see, where was everybody saying they were from? Because, oh, Atlas, you're up in Portland, but Chloe's down here in Bend. So that would be really cool. And yeah, just all the schools that are reading this. I just love that it encourages reading so much more because, yeah, we just got done with banned books week too, and
Yeah.
that's the last week of September. And I still have people all the time say to me, well, why are people banning books? I'm like, exactly. Why are
Yeah.
people banning books? Like it doesn't make sense to my
Yeah.
brain because I just love books. I think they're just magic.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because, it seems like it's material that should have been covered for a really long time. And now that it's finally finding an audience, people, you know, these books aren't meant for the people who are banning them, you know,
Yeah,
and
that's true.
it's a little unfortunate. So,
Yeah.
a
So
lot unfortunate.
what does it feel like though after, I guess we'll go back to that journal entry of I want to write a book someday, and now you have two. Do you like, what's it like to see your book on a bookshelf? Did it just blow you away?
Yeah, it's a little bit surreal, because like this cover, I mean, they took a picture of me when I was 12 and, you know, it's it's a little surreal, especially since the first book is like a personal story.
Right.
So, yeah, it's kind of hard to describe, like the book comes out and you're the same person that you were the day before it came out and the day after. And um, but I would say it's kind of like a gradual realization because like I get nice emails, and when I was querying this book and trying to get it published, a lot of the times, like the rejections would say, well, this feels like such a unique experience that not a whole lot of people are going to relate to. And so it has been really nice to actually receive emails saying, I had the same experience, And usually there are people more my age rather than the kids. And they're like, yeah, my parents sent me away to Japan to, live with my relatives. And there's like several emails that I've gotten about that. So that makes me very happy that there are people out there who have had similar experiences and have just never had that story told.
Yeah.
And so that feels very good. It feels like you've been on kind of a desert island, and then all of a sudden you see someone and you
Yeah.
realize you've been on the same island.
Well, and I think it's so different for a memoir from a young perspective to maybe not have big trauma in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times when we see the telling your life story, it can be because it was a more traumatic experience
Mm-hmm.
and you go from there. But yours is, maybe a little bit like a gentler experience that could also speak to kids who are seeing either foreign exchange students or immigrant children, whether first generation or born somewhere else and brought over, and maybe thinking, oh, this is so different for them. What would I do if I was sent to a country that I didn't live in on a regular basis?
Mm-hmm.
And how would I feel? So I like what you're saying. It's found people who had that experience as a kid, but let's hope it finds it to a kid who sees someone else maybe having that experience.
Yeah, and I feel like it's for any kid who's been new or who knows someone who is new,
Yeah.
because that's, I think, a universal experience as well. And oh, Chloe wrote a question.
Yeah. Was it hard to find a publisher?
It's always hard to find a
That is
publisher. It's
true.
a it's an interesting process. So, as a writer, if you want to be traditionally published, first you write your manuscript, and then you revise it a number of times. Then you try to find an agent, because it's much easier trying to find an agent who will sell your manuscript to a publishing house than it is to do it on your own. So that's the route I went. And you query agents, which basically means you send out a letter or an email and you just describe what you've written, how many words it is, what audience it's for. And usually agents ask for like the first 10 pages in the email. And I don't remember how many of those queries I sent out, but probably over 50, you know. And then I was accepted to this initiative called Pitch Wars, where I got paired with an established author who helped me revise my manuscript again. And that's how I found my agent. And then the agent then goes through a couple of revisions with you. And then when she thinks it's ready, she sends it out to a bunch of editors at publishing houses who she thinks might like it. And that's called being on sub, which is short for submission. And some people are on sub for months. Luckily, I was only on sub for a few weeks before I got my offers. And then I talked to the editors, and then I accepted one. And then it was another year and a half then before I was published. And then again, like 2 or 3 more revisions. So I've lost count of how many times I've revised this manuscript, but
yeah, it's definitely a long process. And some people don't want to wait that long and will self-publish, or they'll find a small independent press. I see a lot more memoirs that are both self-published and independent, because they, like you were saying, they just want it out there. You know, they want their story, for whatever reason, to reach people. Yeah, it's a long process.
yeah.
Yeah, and then the publication itself can be a long process. You know, once a book's accepted, it can take 2 years to get it actually out on the shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, editors will read well, once it's to them, it's like a first draft. They'll read it, and then they'll spend, you know, 2 to 4 months with it, and then write you like for me, their letters describing what needed to be revised were 12 single-spaced pages.
Yeah.
And so then you look at every single thing that they've written and all their edits inside the manuscript, and you change it, and then you submit it back to them, and then they go through that process again. And hopefully by the 3rd time you go through that process, the edits are pretty minimal. But
yeah. So, you know, let's talk about that for a second, because I read a lot of memoir and I've edited a few. How did it feel to have someone making, you know, revisions and suggestions on something that for you, you know, was true? You know, how do you make those changes?
yeah, that's a good question. Like I mentioned before, there was stuff that was omitted because it just, every little detail can't make it in there.
Right.
And so I was lucky to be paired with an editor who was very respectful of what was true and what wasn't true. And so there are times when you, as a reader, might be like, well, I wish there was a sort of like emotional beat here, or like some sort of you know, thing that happened that could resolve the situation more. Like for instance, the relationship with, I guess, the mean girl. Like, we never had a talk and ironed things out and became friends, or at least understood each other. That didn't happen, you know? And I think in a lot of like fictional stories that will happen. Then you understand where the other person's coming from, and then there's like a tidy kind of resolution to that. But since that didn't happen, I couldn't write it, you know, I couldn't say that it happened. And so I don't know, I guess that's one of the takeaways. Sometimes real life is like that. And with fiction, it's nice because you can model how things should be.
Mhm.
Um, but with something like memoir, um, you can show what happened, and then I guess readers can discuss how things, how they wish things could have happened, you know?
Right.
And so it's a lesson in a different way, I guess.
Well, and yours is even more unique in the sense that a lot of times when adults are writing memoir, they're writing about something that happened as a kid, but then they have the time to reflect. You know, this is what happened, family, friends, whatever trauma. And now that I'm older, I would have dealt with it this way. Or, but
Mm.
you wrote this almost, you know, you are your own character in this. So, you know, you're speaking these words that again you're having to remember, but so then you can't do that. But I wish I had had that chance to talk to that mean girl and, you know, work things out. Like,
Mhm.
you're not adding that, like, look back, it's in the moment, and that is so different than most adult memoirs.
Right. And I feel like if I had taken the approach that an adult memoir would have taken, I don't think it would have been as interesting for kids, you know?
Right, no, I agree, yeah, I agree.
So,
Yeah, because you have, I mean, instead of telling the story as an adult, you know, of a kid, you're the, I mean, the kid is telling her fellow kids what she did for these 5 months.
mhm.
Yeah, it's definitely different, and I love that. So that's, I hope, you know, you've created this like little sub niche of middle grade memoir. Like, it's so interesting.
I hope so. I mean, I feel like people have really interesting stories, you know,
I
whether
do.
they're flashy or, you know, like you were mentioning before, like it doesn't have to be traumatic, you
Right.
know. But I think everybody has a story, and so yeah, that was definitely hard in terms of finding a publisher or an agent is just a very different book, you know. So I
Right.
was
You
really
know,
happy that it was accepted.
yeah, because so often there's the a really fine line of agents and publishers looking for something really new, but also looking for something that they know can get published because it's maybe been done
Hmm.
successfully. And you have to, yeah, it's such a fine balancing act
Yeah.
of filling a hole that is in the publishing industry, but also creating something brand new.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like the whole issue of comparable titles, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and if there's a comparable title, a comp basically, that is a bestseller, and you refer to that, then it's like, oh, you know, I know how to sell that because this
Mm-hmm.
is already sold. So it is kind of hard to sell
Yeah.
something that, um, you know, that doesn't have a comp, basically.
And it is, so I deal with those every day when I'm pitching for events or just as a bookseller at the bookstore. So we'll explain this just a touch more for those who aren't part of the publishing industry. When a book gets accepted or is going to be pitched to the rest of the publishing company, the marketing team and the editors go through and they're like, oh, it's similar to this book, and but it's also, so there's two differences. You can have comparable or competitive
Hmm.
as a comp. And so think about it when you go into a bookstore or a library and you tell someone, I really loved Waka Brown's While I Was Away. What else can I read that's like that? So as librarians and booksellers, you know, we get told these, or we read enough that we go, oh, you liked that, maybe you'll like this. And so the publishing industry tries to do that beforehand. So for instance, we had an event last month at the bookstore for a debut author. Her book's called The Marsh Queen. And of course, the one of the very first references is where the crawdads sing, which for you kids won't mean anything, but for adults, we know that that was a very big book in 2019, 2020, and now have been made into a movie. Well, sometimes when you compare yourself to that big of a book, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because if it's not as good, because no two books are the same, then people are like, oh, or you say to someone, oh, if you loved Where the Crawdads Sing, here's the Marsh Queen, and they're like, but I didn't like it. You know, it's a really fine line, because I hear from people all the time and they're like, my book's the next, and they're like, they'll say something about Stephen King, and I'm like, no, don't say that. You're just setting yourself up. And also, you kind of want to be your own. You do want to be your own, you know, you want to stand out. So yeah, I can only imagine what they were thinking too when trying to find a comp for your book, because, you know, I think you've created a new little genre.
Well, thank you. I remember one of my comps that I listed was Brown Girl Dreaming.
Okay.
Because it deals with the issues of literacy. And, you know, it's not a verse novel,
Right.
but I was like, oh, it's kind of the same age, deals with issues of literacy, you know, being in school. So that was one of the comps that I listed.
Yeah, you know, that's Jacqueline Woodson, and she does amazing stuff. So actually, I feel like she has 2 books on the list right now too, on the OBOB list.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I think she does. You know, you're right. Like, this is another one, that memoir style. Yeah, about the 60s and 70s and Jim Crow. So, I mean, again, that's what booksellers want to know too, is I really loved While I Was Away. And then we're like, oh, Brown Girl Dreaming. So yeah, it's a really good thing to have those books to talk about, to get people interested, especially if we have younger readers who, once they find kind of a style of book that they really love, want to read more. Years ago, I worked at Barnes and Noble in the children's department, and someone came in, and I think they had a son that just did not enjoy reading very much, but had liked a certain book. And they were like, find me more like this. And I was like, oh no, I'm not sure I can. But yeah, it's always great to see those books that get kids excited about reading too. Yeah. Well, if we don't have any more questions, and I always have questions, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So I just want to remind everybody that if you're local to us in Bend, please come visit Roundabout for all of your OBOB book and other titles. If you're not, please visit your local independent bookstore. I know those of you in Portland are very close to wonderful bookstores like Annie Bloom's. That's one of my favorites, and Broadway Books as well. Just remember that supporting independent bookstores really helps support just reading and publishing in general, because independent bookstores are where it's at, in my opinion, my humble opinion. We'll get this up on YouTube. So if you have friends who couldn't make it tonight and would be interested in this, please feel free to share it. It'll be up on our website, and I'll post it in the Facebook event just to remind people. And again, Waka, if you make it down this way, please do stop by Roundabout. We would love to see you in person and just take a couple of, fun photos or something. I just love it when authors come and visit in the store in person. So I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, for spending an evening again with us on Zoom. It has opened so many doors to be able to bring authors to us and to you. So thank you again. And I think that's about it.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who joined us.
You're so welcome. And I'm so excited to tell more people about your book, and I hope everyone else does too. Atlas, Chloe, Pia, thank you so much for being here tonight. You guys are great. Best of luck in OBOB, and keep reading, and maybe if you guys are writing stuff too, let us know if you get published. We'd love to hear that. All right, everybody, have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thanks, Julie.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.